Hello, this is Gullotta, and I'm here to show you Zeltroid. Zeltroid is a tool I've been developing to allow Unity content creators to be able to make Zelda and Metroid style games more easily, hence the title, Zeltroid. The main features of the Zeltroid game tool system is that it has a lot of automatic serialization features. So let's try some of those out now. So for starters, on the main menu, we have a menu system. We have a load game menu, but we have no games to load yet. So let's make a new one, and I'm just going to call it Cameron. We'll start the game, and I can move around to my heart's content. One of the features that we have is each of the different rooms, that is to say playable areas, has a box collider that will determine if the camera will move out of bounds or not. Whenever the character is moving around, the camera is going to attempt to fix the player in the center of the screen. However, when the camera senses one of those boundaries, the camera won't proceed any further than that boundary point. Here we have some collectible items. These are mushrooms. So let's see if they're actually working. After this test, I'm going to show you how they work, but for now let's just make sure that they actually do work. So I'm going to pause the game, and in here this is a non-destroyable object from the main menu that's carried on to the actual game space. And here you'll see we have mushrooms, the int name is mushrooms, and the current value is 0. So I'm going to start playing the game, and we're going to just collect 1. Actually, let's collect 2. And you'll see that the int value is now equal to 2. On the whole, this doesn't seem too impressive because you could just have this as a public value that can be shown, but after this demonstration, I'm going to show you exactly how this actually works. So we're going to avoid that mushroom, and we're going to check out the other features such as the room shifting. So when I'm in a room, in most cases it will only render that one specific room, and this way we're not having any unnecessary overhead. Enemies that are in other rooms won't be calculating their pathfinding and so on to try and find the player. It's only going to be showing and calculating the stuff that the player actually cares about at this current point in time, namely all the things in this one specific room. And I will stop maximizing just to show it. But when we hit a bounding box to go into another room, the other room will be spawned, and then this room will be still around, so just that way we can have the actual visual aid of the room shifting. However, we actually have a third room that we can go in. So let's try that. And this is going to be slightly different. So as you notice that it didn't scroll this time, it just flicked from one to the other, whereas this one scrolled. That's because our doors, if I can quickly just select the one that I want, which will be from this spawn point. So if we go to this door, we have these options such as scroll from room and fade. Let's try adding a fade. So we'll fade or scroll. And if we really want to, we can actually do both. Or we can just have one, so we can get rid of the fade and just keep the scroll. And this will then be a normal transition from one room to another. And so that gives us a lot of versatility. So for example, we might not necessarily want to hit the collider and go from one area to the other. So for instance, this spawn point, we can move around, and that will actually teleport the player to another location entirely. So let's teleport them to these rocks. And by doing that, let's not have a scroll, which is make it fade. So we're going to hit that, and we'll fade to that location. This is a really good way to have something like a teleporter, or take Metroid for example, where you have that hub and spoke system where the map doesn't actually seamlessly loop, it teleports you to other locations that then become their own microcosm of different rooms and environments. So that's a basic look at the Zeltroid system. Let's now go under the hood and see some of the things that it's doing, or at least some of the more interesting things that it's doing. So on the game panel we have the entire world at one point, but as you remember, only certain rooms are turned on or off based on what the game was actually doing. So let's just take one look at one of these rooms to see what's actually happening. We have this room manager, which basically governs the entire game from a rooms and zones perspective. A zone is basically a larger playable area. So for instance, using Metroid as the example, the areas like criteria and Norfair would be zones, whereas the individual spaces in there would be called a room. So we can create a new zone just by hitting the create new zone button. And if we expand down, we have this new zone. And we can give this a name. So let's just call it boss zone. And you'll notice it automatically changes the name of this game object to boss zone. And then we have this create new room button, which we can use. And then we have boss zone room 0. The 0 indicates the room's ID, so that way when we're using a door, we know which ID we want to go to and which zone. So let's create a door. Once you create a room, we have all these default game objects, which essentially act as folders. And so we go to this door one, and inside here we have a door. And what we can do with this door is we can say what room ID, so 0, 1, 2, 3, whatever. And then we have this pull down menu, which has all our different zones. So in this case, we only have the choice between the starting zone and the boss zone. And we can pick whichever one that we want. But we're not going to keep this boss zone. That was more for demonstration purposes. So we'll go ahead and delete that. Something more interesting, on the other hand, are the collectible items, such as these mushrooms. These have a script on them called collectible item. Item collectible. And it does several things. The first thing is it wants an item to increase, and then we have a string in there for a certain value. I'll get a little bit more into this later. Next we have an amount, so how much are we increasing to that, and then an ID and this placed button. Inside the database folder we have a scriptable object called a database. And inside here we have, under the int section, mushrooms. This string, mushrooms, is what these mushrooms actually correlate to in terms of item to increase. They're looking for an int by the name of mushrooms, and then they're going to increase that amount by 1, or however many we put in. For instance, we could make this 5, 10, whatever. But this placed button is a little bit odd. I've made a prefab just for demonstrations called mushroom. I'm going to put it in this crossroad. And for some reason the name has changed on me. So I'm just going to go ahead and call it mushroom. ID is 0, good. So I'm just going to put it into the crossroads. And I'm going to put it into the environment section. So it goes to mushrooms. I want to add by 1. The ID by default needs to be set to 0 until you hit placed. So let's remember, in the database folder, we have mushrooms 2, 3, and 4. So this mushroom should change its name to mushroom 5 and also have the ID of 5. And lo and behold, ID becomes 5, the name becomes mushroom 5, and in the database, mushroom 5 exists. It's important to remember that working in Unity, and in particular scriptable objects, a scriptable object cannot be cannot be set at runtime. All these values inside the database only represent the default values. So for instance, these booleans, such as mushroom 5, the starting value is either on or off. And this is going to represent if the mushroom is started as collected or not. There's other booleans that we can use, which might be for our on or off that we want. It just gives us a little bit of versatility. But by default, they're all set to no, because in most cases, things like items, for example, you haven't collected them yet. So let's have a quick look at what this does under the hood code-wise. Not everyone's that interested in code, so I'm going to just skim over this to give a general idea of what this is going to be doing. So this is our game data script. And inside here, we have a function called initiate database. And what this does is it goes through every single string, int, boolean, and float in our scriptable object, which, if you remember, is our database. And it stores their default values into the game data object, which is that non-destroyable object between the menu and the game. So it knows what all the default values are, and these stats that we're storing, they're the ones that we can change during the game. And then later we have a save function, so save data, and what that does is it grabs all that information, cycles through them and saves them into a new file, which has the player's name, and that will store all our information for that specific character file. So for example here, this is us opening or saving to that file name. And that's what allows us to give us all our flexibility. And using this exact same system with the non-destroyable object and so on, what we can do if we go back to the main menu, if I can find scenes, there we go. We go to the menu, save that. I'm going to go ahead and make a new game, and I'm going to call it Gullotta. So remember what room we're in. I can move to the next room. And let's go somewhere a bit more unique. So somewhere like here, I'm going to do save, go to the main menu, hit load Gullotta, and you'll notice I'm in the right room, in the right location. And I can go back to the previous room, and I can collect, say, this mushroom and this mushroom. Go to the non-destroyable object, we have 2 mushrooms. I'm going to hit save, go back to the menu, load, reload Gullotta. The 2 mushrooms are gone, I'm in the right location in the right room, and my mushroom count is set to 2. And just to prove that this actually can load different game data, I'm going to make yet another file called Cameron Gullotta, start that up, and this time I'm only going to collect this 1 mushroom in the middle, stand at the tree, save, load Cameron Gullotta, and I'm in the right location, I've got 1 mushroom, those are the ones there. Back to the main menu, load Gullotta, and lo and behold, the save data holds true still. So I hope you found this interesting. Keep in mind that nothing you've seen in this is a 100% finished product. This is just an update on what the system is currently able to do, and give you a taste of what I'm aiming to do in the future. I hope you found this enjoyable. If you want to contact me, please feel free to email me using the contact details provided on my portfolio.